We live in a world where pretty much any pleasure you can imagine is instant, it's endless, and it's totally private. In a world like that, self-control, it's kind of become a superpower. So today, we're going to dive into the psychology behind it. And look, this isn't a moral lecture. Think of it more as a practical guide to understanding how discipline really works, and maybe how to reclaim a bit of your focus.
Okay, before we get into any of this, let's just get one thing straight right out of the gate. This conversation is not about guilt. Guilt is, well, it's pretty useless here. It just leads to this cycle of shame and avoidance, and that's the total opposite of what we're trying to do. We're aiming for understanding, not beating ourselves up.
And it's absolutely not about shame either, or judgment. Instead of looking at this whole thing like there's something wrong with us, we're going to approach it from a place of, genuine curiosity. We're just trying to understand how our own brains work so we can get a real sense of control over our habits.
Right, so the whole focus here is on control. I mean, think about it. In this age of just infinite distraction, the ability to actually regulate your own impulses, that's more than just a skill. It's a kind of freedom, isn't it? And we're here to figure out the mechanics of that freedom.
So, to really get a handle on control, we first have to understand how we lose it. Let's peel back the layers and look at the real neurochemical reasons why some habits can get their hooks into us so deeply. And you might be surprised. It often has way less to do with willpower and a lot more to do with your brain's basic wiring. So how does that even happen? How does a powerful habit actually form in the first place? What is going on inside our heads that turns something we choose to do into something that feels, well, totally automatic? The whole process usually kicks off with one single, really powerful neurochemical: dopamine.
You can actually break this down into a pretty simple four-step cycle. First, you get a really strong dopamine hit. That's the brain's reward signal. The brain's immediate reaction is incredibly simple. Whoa, that felt good. Let's do that again. Now, if you combine that urge with instant, private access, no friction at all, it's not just a passing thought anymore. It's the beginning of a conditioning loop that just keeps reinforcing itself over and over until the whole thing becomes automatic.
And this right here, this is the critical shift. The conscious, rational part of your brain, the one that thinks about long-term goals and consequences, it just gets bypassed. The question isn't, is this actually good for me anymore? The primitive, reward-seeking part of the brain totally takes over, and it's only asking one thing: how can I get that feeling again?
And this is such a crucial distinction to make. The problem isn't natural desire itself. The real issue is when a behavior starts to shift from a healthy state to an unregulated one. It's when that quick dopamine hit starts to replace genuine effort, when fantasy starts to replace real connection, or when a habit becomes the main way you cope with stress. That's the subtle drift we're talking about, and it can be powerful.
Okay, so what are the actual costs of this cycle? The little things you might not even notice at first. And look, this isn't about scaring anyone. This is just an honest look at the real consequences that a lot of people report when a habit starts to feel a little unregulated.
These things can kind of ripple out into every part of our lives. Mentally, it might show up as brain fog, or just this constant struggle to focus. You know that feeling when you just can't handle being bored anymore? Like you can't even get through a chapter of a book without reaching for your phone? That's what we're talking about. Emotionally, it can create these draining guilt cycles, or even a kind of numbness where nothing feels all that exciting. And yeah, this is exactly the kind of environment where procrastination thrives and our confidence just quietly erodes.
And this really explains why the advice to just stop almost never works, because the habit doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It's usually tangled up with other things in our lives. It can be a quick fix for boredom, for stress, for loneliness. If you just try to cut the weed at the surface without pulling out the roots, well, you can be pretty sure it's just going to grow right back.
So, enough about the problem. Let's talk about the solution. The way to get control back isn't about winning this constant, exhausting battle of willpower every single day. No way. It's about building a smarter system around you. And there are some really practical, system-based things you can do.
Here's a simple four-part framework. First, fix your environment. Seriously, your willpower is like a battery that drains all day. So don't test it when it's at its lowest. Make your triggers harder to get to. Second, channel your energy. Don't just try to bottle it up. Physical exercise is an amazing way to redirect all that. Third, build a solid night routine. The late hours, when you're tired, that's when you're most vulnerable. Having a plan is your best defense. And last, track your consistency, not perfection. A setback doesn't wipe out all your progress. The real goal is long-term control, not a perfect, unbroken streak.
And what actually happens when you start putting a system like this in place? Well, the benefits people report are pretty profound. And it isn't magic, it's just neuroscience. As you start to reduce that constant flood of easy dopamine, your brain's sensitivity starts to reset itself. You might have heard this called a dopamine detox. And the result is your thinking gets clearer, your focus comes back, and with it, you start to feel this real sense of confidence and self-respect again.
But it's so important to understand this. The real goal here isn't lifelong abstinence or just repressing natural desires. That whole approach is fragile, and it usually backfires. The real objective is something way more sustainable and way more empowering.
The real goal is self-respect. And what does that even mean? It's simply the act of making your day-to-day choices line up with your long-term goals. It's about you being the one in the driver's seat, deciding how to spend your own time and your own energy. That's it. It's the core of conscious choice.
So the biggest thing to take away from all this is to just reframe the entire challenge. This isn't some battle you have to fight against yourself. It's an act of deep respect for the person you actually want to become. Just remember this, self-control is not suppression. It is self-respect.